Welcome to the Clenbat 2025 MMA Awards. I'm excited to talk about this, but we're going to get straight into the awards show for today, guys. Let's talk about Knockout of the Year over here, okay? These are all my personal opinions on what happened throughout the year, okay? And I'd love to know what you guys think, if you disagree or you agree with the comments down below, okay? Let's get started with Knockout of the Year over here. What is the Knockout of the Year 2025? We have Green versus Rufy, Murphy versus Pico, Topuria versus Oliveira, and Hack Paras versus Salkilled. This was an incredible one to talk about because you had Mauricio Rufy with one of the coolest spin kick knockouts of all time. Aaron Pico versus Lerone Murphy having an insane spinning elbow against a high prospect too. Like not a lot of people know how good Aaron Pico is, and the timing on that knockout was incredible. Topuria versus Oliveira, leaving Charles Oliveira flatlined. How often do you see that? When's the last time that you saw that? And then of course you have Salkilled straight up killing Hack Paras. All of these were great knockouts this year, but what was the knockout of the year in my opinion, guys? It is Ilia Topuria over Charles Oliveira, guys. It was just the magnitude of this knockout. First of all, the blow was incredible. Ilia Topuria landed a nuke on Charles Oliveira. It was a high-profile fight. Ilia Topuria proving that he's double champ. The guy actually did it, and the guy actually finished Charles Oliveira. He shocked the world. He became the villain yet again. Ilia Topuria, guys, is the winner, in my opinion, for Knockout of the Year, but it was very difficult to choose, in my opinion. And again, I would love to know what you guys think about this, okay? Let's talk about Submission of the Year. There are some great ones to talk about, okay? For Submission of the Year, Bryce Mitchell versus Gene Silva. Gene Silva having the performance of a lifetime and snatching up that beautiful tight sub. We have Makhachev versus Moicano, just a very nice, clean main event win. We have Dvalishvili versus O'Malley. I think this one flies under the radar personally with Merab submitting O'Malley because it was so evident how much O'Malley improved his takedown defense, how much he improved his ground defense, and he still looked improved in that fight and submitted Sean O'Malley. Then we have Dolidze versus Hernandez, where Alex Hernandez was just dragging the corpse after beating him. It was one of the coolest things to witness, guys. For Submission of the Year, I'm not going to lie, it was this close to picking Gene Silva over Bryce Mitchell, but I cannot not go with Anthony Hernandez submitting Roman Dolidze. This was one of the most badass submissions I have ever seen. He beat down Roman Dolidze and had a really tight rear naked choke and literally dragged him across the octagon. This one flies under the radar for one of the best finishes, in my opinion, from 2025. I thought this was so sick to watch. This is definitely the submission of the year, in my opinion. But guys, let's continue on to the next award over here. What was the performance of the year, okay? We have Petr Yan, We have Petr Yan getting the win over Merab Dvalishvili. We have Topuria getting the win over Oliveira. We have Merab Dvalishvili getting the win over Umar Nurmagomedov, and Alex Pereira getting the win over Magomed Ankalaev. All of these guys were phenomenal performances. You have Yan beating who I believe to be at the time, and we'd have to revisit this conversation, but Merab reached GOAT status. If Merab would have continued winning, he would have been literally the greatest fighter in MMA history. We have Topuria and the magnitude of the win that we already spoke about, becoming the double champ, becoming one of the best ever, solidifying himself over Charles Oliveira, having a very clean performance. You have Merab getting the win over Umar Nurmagomedov in a battle, and Umar Nurmagomedov has proven himself to be one of the best 135ers of all time. Merab making him suffer in those later rounds there. And then we have Alex Pereira coming in and storming Magomed Ankalaev, getting his revenge, getting the win. All of these were phenomenal performances, but one of them stands out in my opinion, and it was a clear victory for this one for me. It is going to be Petr Yan getting the win over Merab Dvalishvili in the rematch. Petr Yan regaining championship status. Like I said, Merab was on his way to actual GOAT status, not 135 GOAT status. GOAT status. Petr Yan outclassed that guy, and that guy showed up. I know people were talking about Merab and his activity, and it's too much, and activity beat Merab. That's not the case. Merab showed up, Merab tried, Merab brought a war onto Petr Yan. Yan defended the takedowns perfectly, Yan stayed composed the entire time, and he schooled Merab Dvalishvili, and a phenomenal performance. Petr Yan is by far, in my opinion, the performance of the year, taking the win over Merab Dvalishvili, guys. Let's continue on. Who is the fighter of the year? We have Merab Dvalishvili active champion taking on the greatest division in combat sports history, the top of that division, the most motivated people you could possibly take on. You have Islam Makhachev getting a couple of really, really high-profile wins. Waldo Cortez Acosta, which I never would have thought that he'd be a contender for Fighter of the Year. The guy being active, the guy taking on anybody, anywhere, anytime, the guy getting his finishes, and then Joshua Van. Joshua Van from going, I'm almost sure Joshua Van was straight up unranked, and now he's the flyweight champion of the world. Regardless of how you feel about that Pantoja win, at the very least, he's the #1 contender and proved it. All of these guys had a great year, but one of them stood out in my opinion, and the guy that stood out as the Fighter of the Year was Joshua Van. Another easy pick for me, guys. He went from, at the very least, again, if it wasn't unranked, it was unranked territory. He came in and he beat the champion of the world. He had 4 phenomenal fights, great performances. He went to war in potentially one of the fights of the year against Brandon Royval. He proved to be the #1 contender, and he captured the flyweight title. Absolutely insane year for Joshua Van. It's been nothing but excitement. It's been nothing but exceeding expectations. Joshua Van is absolutely the Fighter of the Year. Merab Dvalishvili would have been Fighter of the Year if he would have got the win over Jan, but you cannot not pick Joshua Van, in my opinion. What a phenomenal, phenomenal fighter, okay? But what was the Fight of the Year? Let's talk about the Fight of the Year 2025. And there were more that I wanted to add to this list, guys. We have Joshua Van versus Brandon Royval. 2 #1 contenders going at it in one of the greatest fights that you'll ever see. Yuri Prohashka versus Khalil Roundtree. These 2 warriors go into battle over here. We have Nazim Sadikov versus Nicholas Mata. They went to war and killed each other throughout that whole fight. And Merab Dvalishvili versus Piotr Jan 2. This was also a war, but it was one of the most high-level fights you'll ever see. The other 2 were like high-level scraps for the most part. Dvalishvili versus Jan was a war, and the highest technical ability going at it too. All of these are phenomenal. There are more fights that I wanted to add to Fight of the Year because 2025 was a great year for fights, but one fight stood out above them all, and it's going to be Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van. Throughout this fight, I was constantly looking at this, and everybody that was watching it with too, we were constantly going like, oh my god, these 2 are like, they're going crazy. Brandon Royval lands a combination, Joshua Van lands a combination. They got better each round. They went to war from start to finish, and then it ended so climactically. Like, you had them really, really digging deep and trying to get the win with Joshua Van at the end of the fight. This was one of the most brutal technical battles that we've ever seen inside the octagon, and Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van is absolutely Fight of the Year in my opinion. Again, there were so many great ones. It was a phenomenal year for fights, but one was stood above them all, and it's going to be Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van. But let's talk about the moment of the year, guys. What was the best moment of 2025? Merab goes viral for pointing at Umar Nurmagomedov, making him roll, making him a little bit humiliated in that octagon. This instantly went viral, and it must be considered to be one of the moments of the year. You have Dustin Poirier having his last fight, saying goodbye for the BMF belt. He didn't win, but he put on a phenomenal fight, had great moments, and then had that great retirement package for Dustin Poirier. One of the best ever, saying goodbye to the sport. A lot of people were majorly happy with Alex Pereira coming in and beating Magomed Ankalaev, storming Magomed Ankalaev. And believe me, Magomed Ankalaev is a phenomenal contender. He's a phenomenal champion. That is a very underrated win. And of course, we have Piotr Jan recapturing the title. One of the best feel-good moments that you'll ever see. After loss, after robbery, after controversy, Jan came back with a win streak and got a really nice performance over one of the best to ever do it, okay? But what stood above them all, guys? It's gotta be Dustin Poirier saying goodbye to the sport, saying goodbye to MMA. It was crazy to actually watch one of the best to ever do it, one of the most fun fighters to ever do it, one of the best fan favorite fighters to ever do it, put on a phenomenal show and actually say goodbye. I just realized that this wasn't the Max Holloway picture that we used, but you get the picture with this entire thing, okay? Dustin Poirier had a great fight, a great ending to the fight against another great fighter, man. And then he had that phenomenal retirement package, and it was actually one of the most emotional times in a sport that I've had experiencing this, watching Dustin Poirier say goodbye to the MMA fan base. So Dustin Poirier leaving MMA was a hit on history, man, in MMA, and I even think about it, and I'm like, man, I'm going to miss Dustin Poirier so much, guys. If you want to keep talking about some videos like this, you know what? How about we talk about my personal favorite fighters? Because I made a video that was kind of like this style a while ago talking about my favorite fighters in MMA history. You can check it out right here, guys. Let me know what your awards are, and thank you so much for being here and watching the video.